Hi, it's Amy Powers here with a tutorial showing how to make a book like this one. I used a die from Eileen Hull called Handbound Journal to make the covers. The collection I used is called Hidden Grove from Stemperia. Okay, let's get into it. The die that I used is a Sizzix Bigs die, which means it's a steel rule die. Not all machines will accommodate a die like this, so check with your machine's manufacturer notes. The great thing about these dies is that they'll cut through a variety of materials, including chipboard, which is what I used. I've cut 2 pieces of chipboard, 6 inches by 7 inches. I use 2-sided adhesive that I get on these rolls, a 5-inch roll and a 1-inch roll, and I use that to adhere the printed paper to the chipboard before I cut it with the die cutting machine. I cover both the front and the back of the chipboard. Now it's a little tricky to cut the front and the back covers. Do yourself a favor and write on a piece of tape the word front and place it, just like this, on your die. When you cut the front cover, place it design side down with the top at the tape, and this will cut the front cover. Now this is a bit tricky, but to cut the back cover, you also place it design side down, and you put the top opposite what you did for the front cover. And that will perfectly cut the back cover. The die will cut holes along the binding edge of the covers. This is for Coptic stitching or other kinds of binding, but we're not going to use those. Instead, we're going to cut a spine for this book. We're going to use a piece of leather for the binding. Now take a look at the book that I made previously. When I cut the binding from the leather using the die, I put the leather pretty side down, and that cut lines into the leather. Not all the way through, but I think I preferred for this book not to have them on the outside. So I'm going to cut it with the rough side down. And that will make it so that these lines are cut on the inside of the binding. And this is handy because I can use those lines to line up the covers when I glue them on. Before I put away this die, I'm going to cut one more binding, and this time out of craft paper. This will line the spine, but it will also cover up the holes that are in the inside covers along the binding edge. After I cut it, I see that the paper binding is just slightly longer than the leather one. I don't know if this has to do with the thickness of the material, but I suspect it does. I'm just going to go and trim a little off of each side. And now these 2 binding pieces are about the same size. Next, I glue the spine to the covers. And I glue them to the outside of the covers. I'm using Beacon 3-in-1 glue for this. It seems to hold the leather well. To prevent oozing, I just use my finger to spread the glue out a little first. I'm using the line cut in the inner spine to help line it up. After this is glued in place, I glue the craft paper binding to the inside, making sure the holes line up. I use my bone folder to ensure good contact. Next, I'm going to ink the covers. You can skip this step if you want, but I think it helps bring everything together, make it look more cohesive, and if your edges are sticky at all from the adhesive, this helps with that. Now let's set the cover aside and work with what's going inside the book. We're going to make 3 signatures. Signatures are groups of pages that you put in the book, and in this case, we're making 3 signatures. We're going to make 2 kinds of inserts for our book. The first kind will be made using solid colored paper. In my original book, I used craft paper, but for this one, I'm going to use this textured brown paper. The second kind of insert we'll make is using the 2-sided printed paper, and we're making a kind of one-page wonder. You'll need 3 sheets of solid paper and 3 or 4 sheets of the double-sided printed paper. You'll cut all of these in half to be 6 inches by 12 inches. Take a look at this design. If I just cut it in half at 6 inches, I would be decapitating the gnome, and I don't want to do that. So instead, I'll take 3 inches or so off the top, and then trim it to be 6 inches. So take a look at your papers before you just chop them in half and make sure that you don't have the same problem. All the other papers that I have selected can be easily just chopped in half at 6 inches, no problem. Now let's put these together. Take 2 of the 6-inch by 12-inch solid papers and trim them down to be 11 inches instead of 12 inches. Now we're ready to score. Let's score those ones that we just cut down to 11 inches. We'll score both of those pieces at 2 inches, 4 inches, and 8 inches on the 11-inch side. Next, take one of those 6-inch by 12-inch solid papers, and on the 12-inch side, score at 2 inches, at 6 inches, and at 10 inches. My scoreboard doesn't go to 10 inches, so I just turned it around and scored it at 2. Now take the last 3 solid 6-inch by 12-inch pieces and score them each at 4 and 8 inches. Next, let's score the printed paper. Take each of those 6-inch by 12-inch pieces and score them on the 12-inch side at 4 inches and 8 inches. Now fold and crease all of those score lines. Don't worry too much about which way you fold them at this point. The next step is to glue these papers together in different ways. First, grab the 2 11-inch long pieces of solid paper. I turn them so that the 2 3-inch sides are together, and I'll make that into a pocket by adding glue to 3 sides. On one end of this insert, I accordion fold the 2-inch panels, and I'll make a side loading pocket. And now I'll glue the end piece down at the top and the bottom to make a shallow outer pocket. On the other end, I use that inner fold to make a top loading pocket by gluing just the side and the bottom. And then I glue the top and the bottom of the other flap to make a side loading pocket. And here you can see all of the pockets that this insert has. Next, I find the piece that's scored at 2 inches, 6 inches, and 10 inches. It should be the only one that has 3 score marks. And I attach that to one of the pieces that's scored at 4 inches and at 8 inches. I can see that I need to trim one of these 12-inch pieces, so I just take it to my trimmer and slice off the difference. Next, I will do the same on the other side by gluing this 2-inch piece to a 4-inch panel. Sometimes you need to retrain the folds after you put these together to encourage them to close well. I use my scissors to cut the sliver off to clean up that edge. For the last folio using the solid paper, I first make a top loading pocket by adding glue to the side and the bottom. Don't do the thumb notches now, unless you're skipping matting these panels. This next trifold, I'm going to accordion fold and make a side loading pocket. Again, ignore the thumb notching. Later, when I bind this book together, I make a critical mistake that makes this pocket unusable, but I'll tell you about that later. Now I join these two together, making a top loading pocket. To mat these panels, you'll need 16 pieces of patterned paper measuring 3 3/4 by 4 3/4. You'll need one piece that's 2 3/4 by 4 3/4, and you'll need 4 pieces that are 1 3/4 by 4 3/4. I ink the edges of all these panels first, before attaching them. And then I stack them together and run a little luster wax in gold along the edge to add a little shine. And then you simply figure out which papers you want where and glue them down. I used some paper from the collection, but I also supplemented it with scraps that seemed to work. Also, I only used single-sided paper here. It pains me to use two-sided paper to mat. I don't know why. I feel like I'm wasting that other side. Okay, so let's talk about that problem with the thumb notches. The first mistake I made was to add the thumb notches before adding the layers of pattern paper over it. But the second problem is that when I went back to add a thumb notch using a slightly larger hole punch, there were too many layers of paper for any of my punches to make it through. I tried and I tried and I tried and I almost ruined the thing. So finally I took the whole thing to my die cutting machine and I used a circle die to cut thumb notches at the top of these two top loading pockets. And that worked. Hindsight, I should have left it like it was. But no, I thought I could improve it. So I took the whole thing over to my trimmer and I tried to cut diagonal lines, making a V across the fold. And this worked, but when I folded it, I realized the lines didn't match up. So I folded the two panels together and made a line with a pencil indicating where I needed to make the new cut to make them line up. And I used scissors to make that cut. Okay, Amy, put the scissors down and walk away from the project. But seriously though, what would you have done? Leave a comment and let me know. Now let's set these aside and work with the printed papers. And basically, we're going to do the same thing with these. We're going to overlap two of the panels to put the pieces together, and we're going to either make a side loading pocket or a top loading pocket. For this first one, I'm going to share a technique that I saw Julie of Camellia Craft do. And she learned this technique from Sandy of Septaria 18. I'll link both of those tutorials in the description. So we glue the two panels together just like you would if you were making a side-loading pocket. But then you take it to the trimmer and slice right through that pocket at the 3-inch mark. You'll have to tuck in those outer pieces so that this can fit into the trimmer. And you just slice down to the 4-inch mark, stopping at the fold. Next, go in with your scissors and just slice off just a sliver between the two flaps. And there's no problem doing the thumb notches on these panels, so go ahead and do those. Next, glue just inside those two pieces to make two flappy pockets. I add another top loading pocket on the other side, and then this insert is done. And then I just go through connecting the other pieces together, either making a side loading pocket or a top loading pocket. And basically what you want to do is figure out which panels that you don't care get covered up, and that becomes like the inner pocket. For instance, for this one, I don't necessarily want to have the sun repeating on a different panel, so I choose the sun panel to be glued over. And then for this odd one, I'm just going to keep it as a trifold. Next, I ink all of the edges of the inserts. And now, at last, let's put this book together. I use those 3 inserts or folios that we made with a solid base, and those will be like the covers of each of the 3 inserts. And then I fit each one of those pattern paper inserts into this. I decide how I want them to fold and which papers will look good together, etc. And I'll make 3 of these little bundles or signatures. I use binder clips to hold them together. Next, I grab my huge dictionary to use as a book cradle. I use the die to cut one strip from the binding to use as a guide for punching the holes, and I fold that in half lengthwise. I use an awl and that guide, and with the signatures binder clipped together, I punch the holes, and I make sure I go all the way through. And I do that for each of the 3 signatures. And now I use some vintage waxed thread, which is threaded onto a needle, and I sew the signatures in. I use a basic 5-hole pamphlet stitch. To do this, I go in through the center hole from the inside of the book, straight through the signature, through the leather binding, and out. Now I go up 1 hole and cup up through the book. Now that I'm back in the inside of the book, I go down through the top hole and then back up through the second hole. And now here's the trick. Skip the center hole and go down through the next hole, under the center. And then you just continue, always going through the next hole. You only skip that one time in the middle. And when the needle is coming up through the center hole again, try to bring it up on the other side of that stitch that's there. Double knot, and then I tie a bow. And you repeat the same process for all the signatures. Let me tell you about the problem that I had with that one pocket that was inaccessible. When I bound the signature, I should have put this pocket on the outside, but instead I put it right there where I'm stitching in that signature, on the inside of the signature, which makes it inaccessible and unusable. I'm just going to leave it, but learn from my mistakes and don't do the same. Stay tuned because soon I'll post another video showing how I finished this book, with decorations on the covers and pages, adding tuck spots and other fun stuff, including some fun old ephemera from my stash. If that sounds good to you, hit subscribe and you'll be notified when I upload that video. Thanks for watching. Hey, if you like this project and want to see more like it, let me know by giving me a thumbs up, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Take care.